The staff of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com join WVUA 23's Jenn and Chapman at Wilhagan's Grill and Tap Room for an in-depth analysis of the Crimson Tide and SEC football. This is Tide Sports TV.
Welcome into Tide Sports TV here at Wilhagan's every Monday night at 6 p.m. You can also catch the replay on Wednesday nights at 10:30, Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Let's start things off with the big picture brought to you by the Soup Store. Joining me from the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com is Cecil Hurt. Cecil, we're going to start with Alabama beats Texas A&M, a good team, on the road in College Station, 41-23. For you, what was the biggest takeaway from the game?
Just the way that the defense continues to improve. They're +3 in takeaways in that game. Of course, when 3 of those are touchdowns, that makes it that much more significant. But just being +3 is important. So I think they continue to get better as a defense, probably the best defense in the country as it is. But they give all their opponents virtually no chance of running the ball, and they're getting better and better in the back.
You know, Coach Sumlin actually said that last week, that he believes he heard an Alabama player say this is the best defense in the country, and he said they probably can say that. Do you think they proved it this weekend?
Well, Eddie Jackson said it, and Eddie's a humble young man and sort of an answer to a question. But you do have to be confident. You do have to feel like you can go out there and succeed, and they'll get their chance to prove it. But certainly, so far in this October stretch, they've looked like it.
Well, the next question about the biggest concern of the team used to be the secondary, and yet this weekend for the first time in Alabama history, they get 3 pick-6. So clearly the secondary isn't as big of a concern as they used to be. What now is the big concern for Alabama football?
Well, every area needs to improve, and people get caught up in the interceptions, which are great. They have 4 interceptions and 3 long returns. But secondary play isn't just interceptions. You can play a great game in the secondary and have no interceptions as long as you're keeping guys covered, leads to sacks, leads to second and long, third and long. So, that's an area that's improving. Special teams needs to continue to improve. The vertical passing game needs to get better. So they have a lot of areas to keep working.
All right. Moving towards the Tennessee game. It's been a long time since Tennessee has beat Alabama, since 2006. Is this still a rivalry game?
Well, it is. Rivalry games have streaks. Alabama went through the same streak from the late 90s through 2005 when they won in Tuscaloosa. And that didn't make it less of a rivalry for Alabama. It didn't make the 2005 win less emotional. So I'm sure for Tennessee, they want to get back, winning the game, and Alabama wants to keep winning the game. So it's still a big rivalry. The fact that they're in different divisions, I do think that it's changed a little bit in that you don't compete with Tennessee for a divisional title, and that makes, certainly Auburn's its own rivalry. But Alabama-LSU that's certainly LSU's biggest rivalry by far. No question, Alabama's their biggest rival. They'll tell you that. And so that changes it a little bit, but it's still very historic and very important.
Tennessee with a 3-3 record. Coach Saban mentioned today that that's not very evident of some of the games they play. Do you think the 3-3 record doesn't show what they're capable of?
Well, when you look at who their 3 losses were against, Oklahoma, Florida, Arkansas, probably the most disappointing game that they had was Arkansas. The other 2 games they lost a big lead, couldn't hang on. But those are top 20 teams, and it's tough to win. Arkansas's not, but certainly Oklahoma and Florida are, and it's tough to win those kind of games. I think Tennessee probably still. I think some of the hype that they got this year was a year early. I think they'll be better next year than they are this year, but they're a very capable team, and they showed that against Georgia.
Every team comes in wanting to beat Alabama. That's always a game that's marked on everyone's schedule. For Tennessee, needing a big win in the SEC, do you expect some surprises, and could they catch Alabama off guard?
Well, they could. That's what Nick Saban talked about today, is you have to focus week by week. You have to take every opponent seriously. Generally speaking, Alabama's not overlooked Tennessee. People can point to the 2009 game, but Tennessee had a week off just like they do this year. They changed what they did offensively and defensively. Lane Kiffin was the coach, had a great game plan, and almost won. But that wasn't a case of of overlooking Tennessee. Now, Alabama's at the end of a long stretch of games, SEC games, tough games, road games. No doubt the off week next week is going to be important for them, but I don't think they'll look past Tennessee.
Let's get to that off week. How bad does Alabama need their bye week?
Well, they, like every team, they need it. They need it to rest up. They've got some guys who are banged up, who didn't practice or hadn't been playing at 100%. Ryan Kelly didn't practice today, coming back from the concussion. Cam Robinson, I don't think, has been at 100%. Kenyon Drake, I don't think, has been at 100%. So, yeah, getting a few days off would really help those guys. And even if guys aren't physically worn down, you get mentally fatigued as well. So I think it's something that'll be important, but it's not as important as playing well against Tennessee.
It's funny you say that, because after Alabama beat Texas A&M, much of the discussion shifted to Alabama-LSU. And that's probably something the coaches want to discourage, because you cannot look past the game you have right now. So even if they need that bye week, they still can't look towards the bye week even. They have to be looking towards this weekend.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's 2 weeks away, if it was next Saturday, if it was Halloween, I think you'd get more of that. There's enough time to focus on Alabama and LSU. Plus, they've all been through it before. The coaches have. In 2011, when it really was the game of the year, the two best teams in college football, people were looking forward to it from the 1st of October on. So they'll know how to handle that.
Since we're in the big picture right now, let's move past Alabama and into the SEC. Ole Miss and Memphis this weekend. What was more surprising, that Memphis won or that Ole Miss lost?
I think it was the way Memphis won. Memphis is a really good offensive team. Got a good quarterback, got a good offensive set that they run, and they've been good against everybody they've played. They have not been a very good defensive team. And Ole Miss just can't run the ball. And that's taking nothing away. They came to Bryant-Denny Stadium, they won. But when it's 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, and you've got to put Robert Kimdichie in there to run the ball, then you can't run the ball. You're not going to succeed long term with those problems. And there are a lot of people who've been saying this week, oh, what if Ole Miss runs the table? What if they win out now that they've lost to Memphis? What if the sky turns purple next week? I mean, weird things happen, but that would be pretty weird if they can run through the SEC West, if they can beat A&M, beat Arkansas, win at State. I would be very surprised if they did that.
And with that loss, I think that's partly why the conversation really shifted towards LSU and Alabama.
I think so.
And then on the east side, we've got Florida and Georgia. Real quickly, let's go to the national scene. The 4 teams you would say right now that would be in the football playoffs. Can you do it now that we're midway through the season?
I don't do 4 teams. I think it'll be 4 league champions. One league, I think the Big 12 champion will make it unless they have 2 losses, because I think they're going to rotate around on who they leave out. I think the committee considers all those kind of things and doesn't, for whatever people believe, they're not sitting there and evaluating the best 4 teams. Their criteria, if you study it, will let you know that's not what they're really doing. Everybody gets a juice box. That's how it
Projections are still projections right now.
Sure, absolutely.
And finally, who would you say, what team is surprising you the most?
Nationally?
Nationally.
Florida, although it's an SEC team, has done really well. The fact that Iowa's undefeated, that's I wouldn't have predicted that. The teams that are at the Baylor, you can't be surprised at that. County High could be undefeated against their schedule.
And with that note, Cecil's Honesty will be back with us later in the show when we answer your questions from the Tidesports.com message board. Stay with us. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV, live from Wilhagan's every Monday night at 6 p.m. You can also catch the replay Wednesday nights at 10:30 or Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Now it's time to go inside the Tide. Joining us from Tuscaloosa News is Tommy Dees. Tommy, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
Let's talk about Alabama's offensive line to start. Ryan Kelly leaves the game. Today, Coach Saban saying they're dealing with some concussion protocol, but they expect to have him back in at some point. How much did that impact the offensive line?
Well, it was huge, especially on the road in a very loud environment. Ryan Kelly's not responsible for just blocking people. He makes all the calls and tells everybody else who to block. And when you have somebody that hasn't done that in live game conditions, I guess the guy, J.C. Hasnauer had been on the field, but not in that kind of conditions, not with the game on the line, 102,000 people breathing down your neck, and they had some problems with that. that's something he's got to get better at, and I expect he will. It's probably an experience that'll serve him well in the future, but Ryan Kelly's invaluable to that offense. I know he had a bad game or two earlier in the year that people blamed him for some things that didn't go well in the blocking schemes, but you see what happens when he's not there. You know, people like to say, oh, the other guy's better, the guy they haven't seen. In this case, the guy they hadn't seen was not better.
And the linemen who usually don't get the recognition that they deserve, when you see something like that happen, then you start to understand how valuable they are. I know the football players understand that, but maybe the general perception doesn't understand it, and that really kind of put a light exactly how important your offensive line is.
Yeah, I mean, you saw how good the offense was when he was on the field early in the game when the blocking was going well. I've never seen a really good offense with a bad offensive line, and I've never seen a real, you know, pretty much you're going to have a good offense anytime you have a good line. And I think Alabama has a good line. I don't think it has a perfect line, but I think it's gotten better and better. But that was a setback, and it's a valuable learning experience for a guy who hadn't been there. But they need Ryan Kelly back to be the best team they can be.
So you think the line is more representative of the first half than it was in the second half?
Yeah, I know people have said Arkansas is a hard team to block. Other teams have had the same problem with them. But look at the Georgia game. Again, Alabama, I thought, dominated that up front. It took a little while, I think, for this line to kind of get its things together, but I still think it's a pretty good offensive line.
Let's go to the kicking game. Still a lot of issues there. Can it get any worse? And, you know, the positives was Adam Griffith made field goals when they needed field goals. But it's still, the kicking game is a big question. And as you get into postseason play, how valuable the kicking game is.
It's a third of the game. You have to be sound in the kicking game, and Alabama is not right now. It can get worse. You know, they did make some field goals. They punted well for the most part, but they got one blocked. It seems like every time they take one step forward, it's 3 steps back. So
I was
something
going to say
good.
2, but okay, stick with 3.
Yeah, something good will happen, and does. They've had a good onside kick. They've done some other things. They blocked a punt, but they just have to get better in that side of the game. They cannot, in my opinion, win at the highest levels without some improvement. And it's not like it's just one thing, like only punt protection, although that's been a problem 2 weeks in a row, or only, kickoff coverage or something. There are various failures across the board in special teams, and there needs to be some improvement for Alabama to be the best team it can be.
And avoiding those penalties when they do get a good run, which that's been showing up now too.
Yeah, and that's a little harder. Sometimes you get the big run because you got the penalty. It's like, if they hadn't, you hear this all the time, a long run gets called back on holding. Well, if he hadn't held, then they would have that. Well, maybe he'd get tackled at the line when that happens. So it's not quite that simple. But yes, they do need to eliminate penalties.
Eddie Jackson said it last week, and Texas A&M's head coach, Kevin Sumlin, basically seconded it. He said that Alabama has the best defense in the country. Is that a fair statement? I
think it is. I think it took them a little while. I think it's gotten better pretty much every week. We know nobody's going to run on Alabama. I don't think LSU is going to be able to run on Alabama. If they do, then hats off to them, because I just don't see anybody doing that. The questions were, was Alabama going to be able to defend the spread? Was the secondary with so many young people going to be very good? And that's what we saw this week. Against one of the better passing game, offenses in the country, or certainly one of the better in the SEC, and Alabama shredded it. If you look across the board, opposing teams are averaging under 50% or around 50% completion against Alabama, and that's not good in this era where you see guys throwing 74% completions. Alabama has taken away that, and a lot of that also has to do with the guys up front. They are getting after the quarterback better than at any time I remember in the Saban era. Saban always, you say sack, Saban says affect the quarterback, but the best way to affect the quarterback is to put him on the ground. Because when you do that a few times, then he starts making bad throws because he don't want to get put on the ground again, and I think we saw some of that.
Yeah, Allen definitely looked rattled and like a 19-year-old kid out there.
I have seen affected quarterbacks throw touchdown passes. I've never seen a sacked quarterback throw a touchdown pass.
That's a very good point. And I think what you said about LSU, if Fournette can run on Alabama, just hand him the Heisman then. Because if he can get through that defense repeatedly, then I don't know that it seems that the teams that run the ball change their game plan when they're going up against Alabama, and that says a lot about the front seven.
Yeah, if I can talk you out of doing what you want to do, And that's, they want to run the ball. Everybody wants to be able to at least have some sort of balance, and Alabama's not letting them do it. Alabama talks them out of that real early in the game, and then they're on plan B. And a one-dimensional team it's going to be hard for a one-dimensional team to beat Alabama. We don't need to get ahead to LSU. We've got a few weeks before we can talk about that. But that's the only team I can see on Alabama's schedule that can run the ball with any effectiveness against Alabama, and I'm still not sure anybody can.
Let's go to the Tide's running game. Derrick Henry rushes for a career high this weekend of 236 yards. When asked after the game, the last time he ran for over 200 yards, which was probably in high school, he couldn't remember it. So that says a lot about, the accomplishments he's making now. How big is it what he's doing, but how important is it for someone else to also get involved? Because can he keep doing this every week?
Yeah, even late in that game and a couple of other times this year, I thought he started to drag a little and didn't have quite the burst at the end. Actually, I thought he was kind of getting his legs back under him real late in the game, and the blocking broke down, and that had something to do with it. If the blocking held up, if Ryan Kelly stays in, he might have run for 800 yards in this game. But yes, he's got to have some help. Whether it's Kenyon Drake, whether it's one of the other guys, somebody has to step up and take some carries away from him so that he can still be a beast late in the season. And I think that's a very important thing on Alabama's plate, is that he doesn't need to be carrying 25 to 30 to 35 times every week, because it's going to be hard to maintain that and keep that up.
Was it 36 this weekend?
I can't remember the number.
It was on a very high end.
Yeah, but now, he did a lot of damage in that time. You throw him against the other 11, and they get hurt more than he does.
And I think the sentiment amongst Alabama fans is just keep running Henry.
I'm sure they'd like that, but if you keep running Henry, you may not have Henry to run later, or he may not be the same guy. We've seen it many times over the years where you just run a guy into the ground. There needs to be somebody to come in and pick up some of that slack, and we'll see if that happens this week.
Each week we've kind of seen a little bit of a different Alabama team. For this team to be successful at the end of the year, what needs to happen with them to just put together a collectively solid game?
There's only one issue and one thing that I think is the most important, and that's turnovers. People say Alabama plays better on the road. Alabama hasn't turned it over on the road. When Alabama turns over the ball 5 times, they lose. When they turn it over sometimes, they get in tougher games. And if they don't turn over the ball and they take care of it, I think they've got a good chance against most everybody, because that defense is going to keep them in the game. And the kicking game does need to get better.
A lot better. Okay, Tommy's going to stay right here. Cecil's going to come up here and join us. And when we come back, we're going to answer your questions that you posted for us on Twitter and on Tidesports.com message board. Stay with us. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV. Now it's time to take your questions that you posted on the Tidesports.com message board. First, we're going to start with the questions we received on Twitter. The first one, why does Jake Coker seem to play better on the road? And I think we should adjust this question to, why does Jake Coker and the Tide seem to play better on the road? Tommy, you want to take this one first?
Well, it starts with turnovers, like I was saying earlier, but maybe he has a pillow that, he gets a better pillow on the road. I really don't have any idea. There could be some pressures associated with having your friends at the game and hearing about it all week, that you kind of get away from things a little when you're on the road, but that's about the best guess I have. I think if they knew that, they would make sure he played well everywhere and the team played well wherever.
A couple of the players mentioned today that they thrive on the environment on the road, and that kind of hypes them up to play a little bit more too.
Yeah, and I would point out, until the Ole Miss loss, they had the second longest winning streak at home in the nation. So it's not like they were playing terrible at home through all this. I think it's a little overblown.
Alabama fans have short-term memory sometimes. Do you guys agree? All right, let's go to the next one. How does Alabama's offense match up with Tennessee's defense? Cecil, you got this one.
Well, Tennessee's, they've had some tough injuries in the defensive line. I don't know that they'll be able to stop Alabama from running. They weren't able to stop Arkansas from running particularly well. So there'll be some things available. Tennessee's good, but they're not great defensively. So I think Alabama will be able to run the ball, and everything that Alabama does offensively is predicated on being able to run the ball. So I would say it's a pretty good matchup.
From the Taco Champions Forum on TideSports.com, what's wrong with Kenyon Drake, and will he be a factor this year?
Well, he needs to be a factor. I'm not sure he's the same player he was before the injury. He hasn't played it as effectively, obviously. I do think he's pressing a little hard to try to make big plays and not to get 6 yards when they're 6 yards and try to get 60, which sometimes mean you get 2 when you try to do that. I do think there's a little of that going on, but I'm not sure that I see the downfield speed that we saw last year where he was kind of like a flanker. He may have been the fastest guy on the team, and he's a speed guy. And also, they're running more an offense built to Derrick Henry, which is between the tackles kind of running, and I don't think that's his best kind of play.
All right. What impact has Mel Tucker had on the secondary, Cecil?
Well, obviously they're playing well, so you have to think that he's done a good job of coaching them. Whether that's in technique, whether it's in scheme, all of it is under the Nick Saban umbrella, and he's teaching them what Nick Saban wants taught. So how much of it you credit to any particular assistant? And I think he's done a great job. That's not my point. But it's all what Nick Saban wants taught. He's certainly been an effective teacher.
All right, we're going to have both of you answer this question, and Cecil is just going to love it because could the SEC get shut out of the playoffs? So we're talking playoffs now. Cecil?
Sure. If you got a champion with 2 losses, Georgia suddenly has a situation where they play Florida without its starting quarterback. They could win, and they're playing essentially a home game at the Georgia Dome. And, Georgia's not a playoff team, but they could win the SEC. So, sure, it's possible. It's possible that all the other conferences will have somebody go undefeated. And even though, particularly in the ACC, that doesn't really make them a better team, the committee, they're juice boxing everybody. They'll take care of who they take care of. And if you got an undefeated conference champion, you'll get in. And maybe you deserve to get in. But it doesn't mean that's the 4 best teams necessarily. But they'll get in.
Tommy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would expect the SEC to get a team in the playoff, but I don't think it's guaranteed because when you look at it, if Utah runs the table, they're going to be undefeated, would be undefeated in the Pac-12. TCU or Baylor knocks off the other. If they're undefeated otherwise, there's another team. And Ohio State and Michigan State, you're running out of teams. And then what if Clemson, which also beat Notre Dame, I think is a good win, would have to beat Florida State? That could leave a 1-loss SEC team. I don't think all those teams are likely to run the table, but it could happen. So, yeah, it's definitely possible. I don't think it's probable, but it makes for some interesting viewing and a lot of rooting interest for Alabama fans all over the place.
Especially those last 2 weeks. With Ohio State, they have Michigan and Michigan State on the schedule.
Right. Every league could get left out. There's nothing. You're halfway through the season. I could give you a scenario where the Big Ten gets left out, where the Big 12 gets left out. Every league can get left out, including the SEC, and that's always going to be true every season, halfway through the season.
All right, our final question this week. Apart from LSU, what is the most challenging game left on Alabama's schedule? And I'm going to say this week because if they don't beat Tennessee, then the rest of the schedule may not matter as much. So you can't look beyond this week, and especially as a fan, you can't get ahead of yourselves either.
Nick Saban loves you for saying that.
Yeah.
I think like a coach.
If you leave out LSU, what if you leave out LSU and Tennessee and Mississippi State and Auburn? Then it's Charleston Southern. So let's just leave out all 4 of them and go with Charleston Southern.
I'm going to say Auburn. They may be improving a little bit. It's a rivalry game. We saw Oklahoma, Texas. Those games are often closer than they should be judging on record.
I forgot about Auburn. All right, that's all the time we have
Nick
for
Saban really loves you.
That's all the time we have for Tide Sports TV. Thanks for joining us, and remember, we are live every Monday night at Wilhagan's at 6 p.m. Have a great week.